Last year on V8 Extra, we toured the famous Champions Brock experience. Today, we take another special tour down memory lane, this time at the unique Bowden collection. V8 Hall of Famers Alan Moffat and Dick Johnson are our guides. And to show you all this famous hardware in action, we've dug through the 7 network archives and dusted off some wonderful moments. That's all ahead today, right here on V8 Extra.
Hi everybody and welcome once again to V8 Extra. We've got a very special show lined up for you today. As you know, our championship series is in recess at the moment and we're on the eve of a very special time in the V8 Supercars Championship because Car of the Future is just around the corner. With all that in mind, we thought it was appropriate to stop and reflect, take a look at the heritage that has driven this business to the point where it is today. I'm standing in the middle of the Sunshine Coast in a private collection of cars owned by David Bowden. More than 80 of them in here. A priceless collection, beautiful cars, some of the most significant racing cars that have ever been on our tracks. And the man that's put it all together joins me now, David Bowden. It is a great pleasure to say welcome to V8 Extra.
Oh, it's so good to have you here, Neil.
Really looking forward to looking at some of these cars in detail. But I mean, the obvious question for me is, how do you get started with something like this?
Oh, it's so hard. I suppose I was a hot rodder when I was young. I used to build 32 Fords and 34s and all that. And then somewhere along the line, around 1973, when I was getting on a bit, I bought the Phase 4 from Keith Goodall in Townsville. And as you know, there's only 4 of those built, and that was the only full race one. And I got in a factory race car, and I realised how good it was. And I realised my old Phase 3 with a souped-up motor and everything was nowhere near as good as a factory race car, and that got me sort of after perfection, you know.
Every single car in here is beautiful, and together with your sons, you've been able to spin a premium car care range out of all of this, out of this business.
That's right. The boys have done that, and I'm very proud of what they've done. We were producing our own car wash because we couldn't buy one that we were happy with, and next thing they started putting it together and then selling it. Yeah.
When I walked in here, I was overwhelmed. There's a show literally in every car in here, but do you have a favourite?
Well, I do and I don't. I mean, it's the one I drove last is about my favourite. But, of course, you know, things like the Super Falcon, I've had that since 1983, and Pete was a great mate of mine. The Moffat Mustang, Beachy's Monaro, you can't walk away from that. True Blue sitting there right next to us, green stuff. You know, of course, Brocky's 78 and 79 Bathurst winners, you know.
So many cars. David, thanks for letting us do this, and what we want to do is lift the lid on it if we can. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
So let's have a look at some of these cars in detail as we head off to the break. Check this one out. The 1981 Bathurst winner, the True Blue Falcon. Couple of touring car championships for that car. The 79 A9X driven by Peter Brock. This car won the race by 6 laps, broke the lap record in the closing stages. How about the 78 A9X? Incredible heritage, a Sandown winner, a Bathurst winner and a touring car championship. And am I revealing my age when I tell you that as a kid I stood on the fence at Calder and watched this car and thought it was beautiful. The first Holden to win the Australian Touring Car Championship, Storm and Norman Beachy's Shell Monaro. The Super Falcon from back in '72. This car was involved in one of the most extraordinary dices in the history of our sport. The late, great Pete Gagan battling with our mate Alan Moffat. And what about this? 42 years on, the Trans Am Coca-Cola Mustang. This is a beautiful race car. We're going to have a look at these cars in more detail today. Shortly, we'll catch up with both Alan Moffat and Dick Johnson. And as we go to the break, let's have a look at some of the beautiful cars in this collection.
Entrenched as leader, Moffat is well in command. Moffat rounds Forest Elbow and heads for Conrod Straight for the last time. He leads McPhee and goes on to win from his teammate.
That was a magic moment back in 1970. Alan Moffat's first Bathurst victory, the Hardy Ferodo 500 miles in those days, did it on his own. This is a very special V8 Extra. We're standing amongst the Bowden collection today. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show two legends of our sport, genuine legends of our sport, Dick Johnson and Alan Moffat. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Boys, look around. We're in the ultimate toy shop. It's beautiful, isn't it?
It's a bit like heaven, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's unique in Australia and probably unique in the world for such an array of what represents Australian motorsport.
What I love seeing here is two fierce competitors working together, being in the one spot in this wonderful museum, but your sons are now in the same race team at Jim Beam Racing. It's fantastic.
It's a bit ironic, really, isn't it? And one many years ago, when Alan was racing and I was racing, it was never going to be a point that you'd ever imagine something like this had happened.
Well, it's great to be able to do it on our show. I said as we came out of the break, Alan, a special moment for you at Bathurst in 1970. On the subject of first, because I want to get into the hardware here now, the first car here, Car 9, 1973, Australian Touring Car Championship winning Falcon. What a beautiful machine.
Well, it was, and it was a surprise to everybody because I wasn't able over the years to win a championship in the Mustang. And in 73, when this came out and was run by Ford Motor Company, Howard Marsden was in charge, we were able to pick up a few, but Brocky was there all the time.
One of the things I want to do today, and we always have nothing like enough time, is to lift the lid a little bit on each of the cars that we're going to focus on and tell a story. I know there's a million of them, but have you got a story relating to this car?
Adelaide round of the championship. I'd qualified well, so I was feeling comfortable. I did have a points lead at the time, or not so much a lead, but I was in front. And phone rang 7 a.m. Sunday morning, which was unusual for me to be woken up at that time of the day. It was Howard Marsden, the team manager. Alan, I've got some bad news. Your car's been stolen overnight. My answer was, Howard, I'm G'd up enough. I know the points are tight. I don't need to be woken up with a pep talk. And in his English answer, he said, Alan, I'm serious. Your car was stolen last night from Stillwell Ford. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. Now that we're serious, what are we doing about it? He said, well, Murray Carter is very said he'd loan me the car, and that kept me in the championship.
Unbelievable stories. Alan, I'm going to let you play with this and reminisce for a moment so Dick and I can have a look at the True Blue car, because these cars, Dick, I mean, the thing that blows me away, you and I spend our lives hanging around V8 supercars. I poke my head inside this thing and I see something that completely bewilders me because, I mean, there's a standard radio in here, there's carpet. I mean, it's so different.
That were the rules, and you know, some of the things that used to happen going back then, you'd pull up in a pit stop at Bathurst and all of a sudden it'd be smouldering because the exhaust is underneath and the carpets are starting to smoulder, and so they'd throw a bucket of water in, you know. But you know, the lack of roll cage, you know, aluminium roll cage probably is like an ashtray and a motorbike, does nothing. But when you see the cars today, they're a maze of tubes.
Well, as I said to Alan a moment ago, every one of these vehicles has got a book in it. I mean, is there a quick yarn you can tell us about this one?
Well, obviously this was the first championship winning car that I had, but it was one of those cars where everyone thought it had 1 million horsepower, but at the end of the day, when it went to scrutineering at Calder one day and I wasn't there, the boys took it up there and I used to take it up full of fuel, and it was then that they realised how quick the car was because it only weighed 1,270 kilos and most of the other cars around were 1,800 kilos, and that's when the war began with losing weight in cars.
Do you find that all these years later, when you look back in here, do you find that you reconnect with a car like this and still have a love for it?
Well, look, I was fortunate enough the Gold Coast last year to actually drive it round, and fantastic car to drive it, and it really still feels very good today.
Well, what I want to do is take us back to 1981 with Dick in this car, the True Blue Falcon. Let's enjoy Hardy's Heroes 1981, but before we go to the break, I want to play some special music. Cue Mr. Moffat.
Want to hear it again?
He's pushing as hard as he can go. Still aquaplaning a little bit over the top of the mountain. Most of the cars Johnson. Still very, very smooth indeed. You think there aren't some fans up there on the top of the mountain giving him a big cheer on, and forward flags everywhere. Here he comes. 38-81.
This man is as tough as nails and twice as quick. Oh, sensational time off the top of the mountain.
On to Conrod Straight, and with a good shot, perhaps of taking pole position. Sideways out of the turn and across the take, 2:14.708. Mount Panorama has erupted.
Lambswool seat covers. You will not see too many of those at our next V8 Supercar event, which is coming up at Queensland Raceway. This is the Greens Tough Falcon. You just saw some wonderful imagery of that car from Hardy's Heroes back in 1984. Dick Johnson joins us again. Dick, this is a pretty significant vehicle in your history. Picked up a touring car championship in this little number.
It certainly did, and ironically, a lot of the mechanical parts in this vehicle here are the ones from the previous year when it went through the trees at Bathurst.
See, I had no idea that that was the case. I didn't realise that you'd actually fed bits into the 84 car that were involved in the shunt the year before.
We certainly did, and ironically, you know, when you're having a bad weekend, you wouldn't think things could get worse, but on the way home between Bathurst and Orange, the boys had the old car in the trailer, and it actually rolled on the way back home. So the weekend just couldn't get any worse.
So this is the 83 car that we saw firing through the weeds off Forest Elbow and that horrible catastrophe. You're telling me that on the way home it was involved in another shunt?
It had another accident, so you got to say that it was an unlucky car in one way or another.
Was this a nice old girl to drive?
It was a great car to drive, and certainly when they allowed us to put bigger brakes on them and those big 19-inch wheels on the back, they were a fantastic car, and I think it's one of the people's favourites.
I can remember you having some monumental battles in this car, in particular with Brock.
Well, to win a championship, it's about being consistent, and the car was very, very reliable. It finished every single race of the championship, and we're on the podium at every race, but we only ever won one race, but still won the championship.
These are great memories. They're certainly great vehicles. And what I want to do is just remind everybody about the fact that this is not a publicly open museum. However, if you have a look at the details on screen with the website there for Bowdens Own, from time to time, there's some open days where you can sneak in and have a look at some of this hardware because it's great stuff. Talking about great stuff, what about this vehicle here? Alan Moffat, the 1977 Moffat Ford Dealers XC Falcons. If ever there were iconic cars in the history of Australian motorsport, then it's these.
This is it, and this is Colin's car, and I can say it was an absolute delight to be able to have Colin join my team and to run the two cars throughout the championship was really something. But they weren't without their flaws, and stopping was one of them.
That was the thing. I mean, you guys know because you've seen this go through 4 decades of transition, really. But today, we can go to Bathurst, as an example, and on lap 161, you can use the brake pedal as hard as you did on lap 1. That was not the case back in 1977 or earlier.
Well, we could do it the other way around. We had brakes for 1 lap, and then we had 160 laps where we used the parachute. It was quite a nerve-wracking exercise, and we always tried not to have to change the brake pads. We had thick brake pads, but the stopping power wasn't there, and it was the people that had to nurse the car made it do it. But Colin was a superb backup to us throughout the season, and the number of 1-2s we had was quite amazing.
I think it's also misunderstood how quick these cars were. I mean, I was up there that day that you picked up the win in '77, and down Conrod Straight, these cars were fast.
Well, we would have been doing over 180 miles per hour.
Yeah.
And stopping was an optional extra. You had, if you jumped on the brakes and you burnt them up, you were never going to finish. And somehow or other, we managed to get by. But the 1-2 finish is certainly the highlight of my career.
Bear in mind that that was when Bathurst Straight went
straight.
all the way down.
Straight. That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. There's no kink in it in those days.
And from memory, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the car that you drove, when it was pushed out onto the grid for the start of the event, the brake pedal was on the floor. But miraculously, it was obviously your day, where the brake pedal came back just before the start of the race.
You've never seen anybody talk about a duck paddling. I was pumping that brake pedal as the checkered flag was coming down, as the starting flag was coming down. I never knew whether I was going to make it through the next corner. Miraculously, it came back up again.
Fantastic stories. Terrible. This is a beautiful motor car. This is the car that Colin Bond drove to position 2 in that race. In fact, what I want to do now is go to the break and recall some of the extraordinary images of the 1977 Bathurst 1000, some rare vision of these cars.
Just let me fall into an open space where I am free to breathe. Don't try to bring me down.
The top of Motorcraft Hill, the Palmer Tube Mills Motorcraft Mustang V8, Dick Johnson at the wheel.
And now it's tumble down deck. And the car is handling like a dream.
Johnson leading, Jim Richards the series leader in second place.
Welcome back to V8 Extra. We're on our last lap. We've changed location now. We're at Bowdens Collection on the Sunshine Coast and surrounded by some of the most extraordinary race cars in this land. Kevin Bartlett's number 9 Chevy Camaro, the Lotus Cortina of 1964, Alan Moffat's car, his first professional racing car. Jimmy Richards' BMW 635, the JPS car. This car behind me, the 1987 Bathurst winning car of Peter Brock's. It's time now to talk about some very special American muscle. I'm surrounded by beautiful Mustangs. We've got the Greens Tough car here that Dick Johnson drove in 1985 and Alan Moffat's Coca-Cola Mustang. Boys, these are super special cars for me. Now, I said at the top of the program that we're on the verge of a chapter change in our business, and that's what this car represented, because in 1985 it was the beginning of Group A.
It certainly was, and we went from the Green Stuff Falcon and had to sort of get something in the Ford range that was going to suit us. And to me, the only thing that I could use was the Mustangs. I bought 2 of these from Zaxpeed in Germany. This one had never been raced when we got it, and the other one had done a couple of touring car rounds over there. So it's a pretty significant part of the history.
Beautiful little car, and I wanted to find an excuse to line it up not terribly far away from the black car, because there's that wonderful exchange that I remember at Bathurst going up Mountain Straight where you're in this car with a race cam, Jimmy's in the BMW, and there's the exchange of waves and what have you. It was pretty significant.
It certainly was. It just showed you the difference in speed between the 2 cars and virtually how slow they were by comparison at Bathurst, because we had time to say g'day to one another, but these days they don't do that, do they?
They certainly don't. Time now for Big Pond email. And Max Cutler from Airlie Beach asks both you gentlemen, do you have a favourite car in the Bowden collection?
Well, look, quite frankly, anyone who asked me what my favourite car was, I always tell them it's the one that won a race. But realistically, I think the one that's significant for me is the one that we won the first Touring Car Championship and our first Bathurst in the 1981 True Blue car.
She's a beautiful old bit of kit. Alan, for you?
Well, picking up on Dick's theme, the one that won the most races for me, I'm very fond of this little beauty. 1 of 7 made in 1969.
Your strike ratio of success in this car is extraordinary. 151 starts, 101 race wins. That's not a bad innings.
It earned its keep over 6 years. Did a lot of miles in it, but it was a joy to drive, and was very popular with the fans.
I said at the top of the show, 42 years on, and it's still just as significant, just as beautiful today as it was when it first rolled out into the racetrack. Hey, I want to do something, because we've not done this so far in the program, and that is to have a look beneath the bonnet, which is where it's all at with these cars. So let's sneak around and have a peek at this thing, because it is, and this is a phrase of mine, it's engineering art. It is beautiful under here.
Well, this is exactly as the way it was produced. A famous Boss 302, which is 5 litres in our language, equipped with the Weber downdraft carburetors, essentially a carburetor for every cylinder, and it had a total of 485 horsepower in 1969.
And believe it or not, that engine is the basic same engine as what we use in the Ford V8 supercar today.
Isn't that fantastic? It's extraordinary, isn't it? Hey, quickly before we go, I didn't put a full stop on the story about the 73 number 9 car when it got pinched. Obviously, it was a happy ending.
After the police found it in the Adelaide Hills, we got it back.
So looking ahead now to our next V8 supercar event that's coming up at Queensland Raceway, August 19, 20 and 21, the Ipswich 300. Our next V8 Extra, well, we're off to Jim Beam Racing, going to catch up with Dick once again. Looking forward to that, a workshop show with an audience, lots of fun. Gentlemen, it's been a great pleasure to spend time with you today. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us.
Our pleasure.
Great to see some of the old history, mate.
It is, they're great cars. And thanks also to the Bowden family who've done a wonderful job of hosting us today. Hope you've enjoyed the program. Look forward to your company again next week. Bye for now.